and welcome to Raise the Game. I'm very excited because today I'm joined by an amazing teacher, Siobhán the Ghiolla from Ardán Languages. One of the big challenges for students all over the country is they struggle with languages, specifically Irish. And Siobhán has an amazing methodology. She teaches, she has 2 language schools, and she's written textbooks, published books in both Irish, French. She's also teaches Spanish as well. And I'm very excited to have her join me here today. Siobhán, one of the big things for a lot of students, they struggle with Irish. Why do so many students struggle with Irish?
Great question, Ray. I'm not really 100% sure why they struggle with Irish. I think they just have a mental block with the language. I think they find it difficult to pronounce, difficult to write, difficult to spell, difficult to structure. And to be really truthfully honest with you, the interest isn't always there. So yeah, it goes way back to primary school. And even though the results have shown that students tend to do better in modern languages in Leaving Cert than they do in Irish.
Well, it's interesting you talk about from primary school, and you know, I suppose you help students who struggle with Irish, and a lot of students will say to me, "Why do I need to learn this?" So suddenly you have a young person sitting in front of you whose mom, whose dad has who wants to get them some help. How do you help them?
Okay, so the first thing I do is I create an interest in the language. I don't talk about the language, I don't talk about grammar, anything like that. I tell them a little bit about the history of the language. So the first thing I talk about is the origin of the Irish language. So I'll tell them that it comes from Indo-European origins, so that the Celts would have moved across Europe and carried it with them, probably from the Asia or India. And our language goes right back to Sanskrit. So that's an old Indian language. So I start to tell them these things and talk to them a little bit about maybe Celtic gods and things like Lunasa and Mehev and Samhain. And I tell them that our Celtic gods are in our months. And I started to generate an interest in the language, tell them a little bit about the 70 million people of Irish origin around the world who want to learn Irish and why. I tell them that Irish is in every place name in the country and that it tells them the history of the place name. So I sort of generate an interest that way. And then you can kind of see, I didn't know that. So Irish isn't just something I have to learn to pass. It belongs to me. It belongs in my DNA if I'm Irish or if I was born in Ireland. And it's part of my heritage, part of my culture, part of my identity. So it's that's really where I start. And then you have a lot of students thinking, and then I might give them a little exercise to do on the origin of their place name. And then they come back to me and they say, it's the field of the holly, or it's the town of the inlet, or it's the town of the monks. And then they start to see, okay, maybe I can make some connection with it. Whereas if you teach them French, it's all about going on holidays to France or Spain. It's just a way of thinking, that's all.
And one of the big things is for us, and maybe it's a disadvantage, we grow up speaking English. And I remember being in an international school in Luxembourg, and the director is speaking to me in English. He's speaking to this guy in French, and he's speaking to this person in German. And I remember thinking, wow, are we lazy because we speak English?
100%. We're not open to, we don't develop our linguistic intelligence. It's such a pity. However, it is changing because we have so many wonderful students now from, say, all over the world, Poland, Ukraine, all the different origins, different nationalities. And that's bringing a different kind of element to the class. So students who are bilingual, they tend to have a facility in learning a third language, and they're much more open to cultural identity, whereas we're quite kind of comfortable in our little setting, and we're not that open. We should be more open, but it is starting to change for sure,
And it's interesting you speak about linguistic intelligence. So there's multiple intelligences, right? Some people are mathematical, some people are bodily physical, some people are linguistic. Is that something you can learn?
Yes. You have to develop your creative side. You have to maybe, if you're interested in music, you tend to be good at languages. It's an area that you can easily develop by immersing yourself a little bit more in other cultural identity. Even if you're interested, for example, a lot of young students are interested in manga now. and they want to learn Japanese, and they learn Japanese in TY. So it's all about kind of generating an interest in something else apart from where you are from, if you get me.
And obviously, a lot of students come out of primary school. And I think one of the things you said to me, it's amazing how low the standard is. Suddenly they arrive in secondary school. We've got junior cert exams, leaving cert exams. They spend 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the education system, and still they're struggling with Irish. How do you, or what do you do at that stage? In terms of helping them? Is it verbs? Is it phrases? What are the building blocks that you start to put in place?
First thing is confidence building. It's nothing to do with learning. It's showing a student that you can actually do this. So what I would maybe do at the beginning of the year, I would show them an exam paper. And I'd say, what do you think of that? Can you do that? No, I can't. Do you understand that question? Haven't done any poetry yet. Okay, let me show you this after Christmas and let's see what you can do then. And then there's a sort of a sense of, oh, maybe I can accomplish this. Maybe I can learn. And the student, you see, the thing, Ray, is the student will have to want to learn as well. That's the thing. So if they don't want to learn, it's much more difficult to inspire them. A lot of them don't want to learn because they feel they can't as well. So that's really where I would start. I would build on the confidence. And that is the first thing you do there as a teacher, especially of Irish, is build the vocab base. The vocab base is very, very weak, generally. And it's strange because a lot of them would have, a lot of the students would have done, as you said yourself, 8 years of Irish. And they're coming into secondary school. And I think also, if the Minister of Education doesn't mind me saying, the course is archaic and very badly designed. That's another problem. I mean, we could make a lot of changes. If I was able to make the changes, I would make them. And I know that the students would be a lot more inspired and a lot more interested in a completely different curriculum.
And is that because we are hammering people on poetry and, I remember, I can still remember Peg Sayers from back, and that just shows my vintage, but which scarred a lot of students, right? So it is a lot about the curriculum. So, suddenly if you're studying, I don't know, manga in Irish, it kind of changes.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? There are so many young musicians out there, young bands, and obviously some of the content or the lyrics would have to be, slightly changed. But I was promoting a band a couple of, maybe 2 years ago before they even got famous. Now they have become famous. Kneecap is their name. Unfortunately, be able to use their lyrics in the classroom. But I mean, if you listen to some of the lyrics, you'll understand that they're completely immersed in their identity and they're proud to use their language.
Very interesting. I've played some of their songs at the start of my seminars, but that's why I get called into the school. Love it. And they rapping in Irish. When I heard that, my head was spinning. Yeah.
Go on.
In terms of so and you mentioned the magic word, confidence. Mm-hmm. And that's a word that I talk a lot about. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a big part of that comes from the learner themselves, but a lot of parents don't have confidence in their own ability, and confidence comes from the home. What can a parent do to support their son, their daughter with language learning?
Great question, because I thought about that a while ago, and really a lot of the parents would just hand over I wouldn't say the problem, but the issue to me, because like you said, they don't have French or they don't have Spanish, or they certainly say to me, well, now I did Irish a long time ago and I wouldn't be any good at it really. And I know that they would be able to help. But sometimes remember, that's what I said to you a minute ago, is the course is it's really badly designed. For example, there is no oral exam for junior cycle. Who took the oral exam off the junior cycle? It should be mandatory for everybody because it would help students step into the next senior cycle part and have an ability to have a conversation with somebody. So that's what I'm saying. The course, that is half of the problem, but obviously I have to work with what I have. So how could parents support? They could good question again. I suppose again, help the student build up their confidence, get some very good classes if they can, maybe get somebody to help them with a private class just to start them off, but to encourage the student to enjoy what they're doing as well. and ask them maybe to look around them and see what elements of Irish is in their life. But at the same time, parents have a very busy lifestyle as well. So do they have time? Not always. I'm happy to help any parent that wants to call me or ring me or ask me for any assistance. But good resource books is probably a good idea as well.
And there's a lot of apps out there. So, for example, Audible, and I've used, downloaded different programs, because I've been learning Spanish over the last 2 or 3 years. So, Michelle Thomas or Pimsleur, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you find apps are helpful because there you're hearing the language?
I used to. I don't so much anymore, because I'm just talking about preparation for an exam. If it's outside of, if you're learning like you are for pleasure, for leisure, it's different. If you're preparing, say, for example, an exam for Irish, you really have to focus on every element of the exam. If you start opening up different apps and learning this and learning that, you will get immersed in too many apps, too many Instagram posts. And that's something I advise my students to steer clear of. Certainly to listen to podcasts, As Gaelge or Bronchish. Certainly to watch TG Carr. Some of the programs are actually very good and they have subtitles. There's a very good, this is for Leaving Cert, is peg.ie, which is an excellent website, which produces pieces of journalism every day from different journalists, As Gaelge, and they're all current affair topics. It came into my inbox this morning and I can't remember what was on it, but there's a lot of information at the moment about the weather and climate change and that kind of thing, politics. As simple, what I do for my Leaving Cert students is, I'm actually going to do this morning, so I'm going to send them out 2 articles from peg.ie to read over the weekend. So,
fantastic. One of my students I was coaching last year did not like Irish to junior cert, and then she, in the transition year, she went off to the Gaeltacht and came back transformed. And now she's gone from struggling at junior cert level to absolutely loving Irish at Leaving Cert. So one of the big things that I see with students, when they get that immersive experience, that really helps. What's your thoughts on things like the Gaeltacht?
100%, 100%. It's not just about being immersed in the language, it's about all the different social skills you learn. So you're learning interpersonal, social, communicative skills, agus tátu ag fólam trí Gaeilge, and you're learning them through Irish. So all of a sudden it becomes a fun thing. You have to speak to your friend in the same room and, As Gaeilge. You have to speak to your man and see As Gaeilge. Otherwise, in a lot of cases, you're sent home. So you have to do it, and nobody's making fun of you, and the pressure isn't on you to have a correct or an incorrect answer. It's a natural way of speaking the language. So a lot of parents do send their children to the Gaeltacht or off to the Aran Islands for a year. And like you said, they come back transformed. Yeah.
And a lot of students, now some do. I had one student who went to the Gaeltacht and she still didn't like the language. But certain things work for certain people.
That's it.
And in terms of, you just mentioned the exam there. So, we're coming now, and depending on when people are watching this, but it's crunch time, whether it's November assessments, mock exams. People get very anxious today. 72% of young people struggle with high anxiety in an exam year, severe exam stress. What can a young person do coming into a big set of exams to manage that anxiety, specifically, say, with a language?
Sure. The most important thing that they need to know, and I hate saying you need to know, I'm very careful when I say that, is understanding the exam paper itself. I have Leaving Cert students who don't even realise that the oral exam is worth 40% of the overall exam. So what we do in Ardán is we analyse every single question on the exam paper and we do the maths. And I say, this question is worth 16.6. This question is worth 5%. Why are you asking me to do the poetry now? We're not doing that. We're not doing it till after Christmas. We focus And any student who has high anxiety, take out your exam papers. It doesn't matter what exam paper it is, whether it's business, economics, Spanish, whatever. And look at each question individually and see how much that question is worth overall. If it's worth anything under 10%, you can leave that at a later stage. But going back to exams for languages, what I do in my classes is we are working on oral exam preparation, that students know what questions are coming up and what the answers are to those questions. So my advice is to make sure you have your oral exam prepared now. You can put it away in a drawer and forget about it, but once it's done and the answers are corrected and right, that'll take a lot of pressure off you, and you will have built up a huge vocab base from it. So I spoke to a student last night who told me that their teacher had, no disrespect to the teacher at all, but had spent a lot of time the last 12 weeks on something, and he was very worried about this question, and his mom asked me to talk to him. And the teacher had spent a certain amount of time on a question. I'm not going to go into any details. And that question's only worth 6%. And this student hasn't done any work on his oral exam, which is worth 40. So that student obviously didn't know that. So get out your exam papers, go through each question and do the maths. And that's what
the weighting of questions, marks, exam strategy. I see it over and over again. This is what I teach students, breaking down the paper, and it's what you and I would consider exam intelligence or, a strategy, but a lot of students get that wrong, and that's where they can lose a grade or two. Just in terms of, and I have a note-taking methodology. I call them whiz grids. They're one-page summaries. A couple of weeks ago with my students, we were going through the prose on Trial, and a student sent me 2 or 3 photocopied pages of all this text with fairly hefty Irish. And one of the things that I was trying to do was to break it down, to actually extract keywords, to break it into a one-page summary. How can someone approach something like that? Because when I looked at it first, I was overwhelmed. I had to take a moment myself and go, okay, I went out and played guitar for 2 minutes, back in with a different kind of head. And I said, okay, I need to deconstruct this. But I've obviously got a different approach on this. Any advice for that type of thing? When you look at something, get overwhelmed, and how to deconstruct it and break it down?
Yeah. I see that all the time. I hear that all the time. I can't speak for Trial because I don't do Trial. I hate not to term, but it's the same section. It's the same extra literature question. That, first of all, is only worth 6% on Trial. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
So listen to this. So on Trial is worth 6%, right? Your oral exam is worth 40%. I'm not finished. The core section of your oral exam is worth 50% of the oral exam, but it's worth 20% of the overall. So the 6.5 minutes you have for the conversation in the oral exam is worth 20% of the overall exam.
Wow. Yeah, a fifth.
So that's on Trial, that's the poetry, and that's the stories. In
Bang.
those 6 minutes. So it's things like that I teach. This is what we're going to concentrate on. Of course, we're going to cover all elements. Don't be overwhelmed. One of the big problems, I see it all the time, especially with Irish, I don't see it with French, is reams and reams of, I'm sorry now, notes that are of no use. It's not, I couldn't learn all of those off by heart. And I'm a long time teaching, and I speak a couple of languages. But I could not learn anything off by heart like that. It's not possible. I don't think my mind could let me down, so I'm not going to take that chance. So being overwhelmed like that, you need to, for example, another thing that students are overwhelmed with Irish are the Sráith Pictiúrí.
Yes, the Sráiths.
We'll talk about that another day. We'd need a class just for that. We would, seriously. Again, that's a massive, overwhelming element of the course for students. I don't advise to learn it off by heart. We have a method for that. I'll happily teach that to students someday if they need it, just to help them get through. That should never go over 2.5 minutes, max.
And obviously, when I work with students, I profile them. So we find out their learning style. Are you visual, are you auditory, kinesthetic? What's the best way for you to learn? Left brain logical, right brain creative. And you mentioned the word creative at the outset. For a student who's a kinesthetic learner, so they learn by doing, or someone who's highly visual, is there anything you can do to help, a student who is aware of their learning style, study more effectively?
That's a very good question. I think the first thing a student needs to do is to actually know what their learning style is. Not everybody, and like you, I can kind of, again, it's just from years of doing this, you can kind of get the profile fairly quickly once you talk to the student.
And that's what I do. I profile the students. So they come away from my sessions knowing this is your learning style, this is what you need to do. So I had a student, for example, who came to me, had written 2.5 hardback notebooks full of ag science notes, all these experiments. Kinesthetic learner, I put a hurl in his hand, got him to walk around the room, shorten the study sessions to 30 minutes, and boom, he went up 2-3 grades very quickly. So it's amazing how once you get away from this writing and highlighting and all. So yeah, I'm just curious as to someone's process for learning.
Yeah, I will explain a few things. Well, again, I would teach quite, many students. So I'm just thinking of the ones I have this year, and I only work online now. I only teach online because I've taken a career break. So what I do is I try to meet students individually, and like you, I just profile them kind of visually or after having a little chat with them. For example, some of the things I can do with students is I can, for example, let's say the oral exam, they might have difficulty pronouncing, they might be nervous, they might be anxious. What I do is once their oral exam is written, typed up and corrected, I just record them sections for them. We do a little Zoom call like this, and I record all their answers. They have it on their phone, and then they listen and they read at the same time. And eventually it will go in. And I cannot, emphasize the importance of consistency. One of the ways I teach vocab is I say, guys, I'm just asking you to just look at the vocab for 5 minutes a day. That's 35 minutes a week. You'd find you might spend a bit more time at it. Even if you're exhausted, you don't want to do any study in Irish today, please just take out your vocab folder and read over, say, a section on technology. And those words will appear on reading comprehensions and listening comprehensions. That's how I teach. It's actually a simple method.
That's brilliant. That's great.
There's nothing difficult in any of my classes. And students adapt very, very well and do extremely well in exams.
And that's the power of consistency and then review, right? Because that's how, and with Mrs. Matza Ireland, we were talking about marginal gains, right? So it's just incremental little improvements every single day. One of the things that a lot of students, and what I say, they'll ask me all the time, what can I do every day? So you've just said it there, just looking over your vocab or using your phone, listening back on notes.
Absolutely. Try and have the Wi-Fi switched off on the phone as well. That's another problem. But I think once students get to Leaving Cert level, they kind of know that, they know not to have any interference, to be honest.
Can I just ask, obviously there's a difference between, and what I see in schools is obviously 3rd and 6th are the big years, the exams are happening, but 2nd and 5th are very important years. So 2nd year, 14, an age where I see students can go up or down a gear. And then obviously 5th year is the year we're putting the foundation in for your 6th year. Do you work with 2nd and 5th years and for those particular year groups?
I do indeed, yeah. And they're the most important years, I think, in the learning progress, the learning steps. 2nd year, I find they're a little lost because they're not first years anymore and they're not the youngest in school and nobody's kind of making a fuss at them anymore. Then all of a sudden there's this massive workload and teachers are talking about exams and CBAs and junior cycle exams, and the work is, the transition from 1st to 2nd year is very difficult. But they tend to settle in fairly fast. However, 5th year is much more difficult, especially if students have done TY. It'll take them probably about 3 to 4 months, and this is in my opinion, to settle in to the learning process. they're overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do as well, and have to homework and that kind of thing. So I would really, if you're going to do extra classes or grinds, do them in second and do them in fifth. I do get a lot of fifth year and second years. I don't see them in sixth year, which means like they've done really well. They might come back after Christmas, or they might ask for maybe a couple of private classes. But once you put the work in fifth year, and what I do in my class, believe it or not, is I put the fifth years in with the sixth years.
Yeah, and that brings them up a gear.
It brings them up, and they do exceptionally well. Initially, they might be sort of sitting there, but by the time we get to say April, the fifth years have covered the curriculum for now. Okay, they're not under the same pressure, but they do the same homework, they do same assessments, so that works really, really well for fifth years. And by the time they get to sixth year, they are super confident they have covered the curriculum.
Is homework study? You mentioned homework there.
Yeah, I do give homework, but I leave it up to the students to decide whether they want to do it or not. So I encourage responsibility of learning in my class, not at second or third. Second and third year, I insist on the homework. And first year, I've started a first year class now. But sixth years, there are a few students who haven't submitted homework at this stage, and I have told parents, I email them, but really I want them to take responsibility for their learning. If you do not take responsibility for your learning, you are not going to do a good exam. It's that simple. And I can't keep saying it over and over again, but the students that submit the homework on a weekly basis are the students that are going to do very, very well. Even if the problem with homework is a lot of students are afraid to make mistakes. But I always say to them, it's my job to correct them. So don't worry if you make a mistake. That's the whole
It's interesting.
Yeah.
The fear of failure. See this
so
much.
Big problem. And I get a lot of students as well who might send me a message and say, please don't ask me any questions during class. That's okay, I understand that. But the homework you're doing yourself in the comfort of your own home. So if you don't do homework, well then how are you going to remember what you learned? How are you going, if you don't, especially for oral exams, if you don't write out the answer of a question we have gone through in class, and I also have resources to back it up, so they have a book that they can work with. But generally they all do genuinely they all do the homework, in fairness.
I have two things because I'm conscious of time. We want to wrap things up.
Sure.
Two last things. The first thing is, if there was one lesson or one bit of advice or one tip you'd give anybody to learn a language, what is that one thing?
It depends. Are you talking about learning a language for exam preparation? Yeah.
Well, in the context of here, it has to be for exam.
Yeah. Okay, it's one word you want. Vocabulary.
Vocab, building up the vocab.
Building up the vocab, yeah. In first years, it's a pity I can't show you, but a lot of students will start in first year, and we have a vocab folder. Of course, you can access vocab online. You can type in words in Irish for clothing and you'll get them. But what we do is I give them a list of topics, because the courses and the exams are designed around specific topics.
Got it.
Right? So from year one up to sixth year, you have to be building along those topics.
So if you're talking about your home, if you're talking about holidays, if you're talking about travel, if you're talking about music, you've got the vocab around that.
Technology. So let's go a little bit further than that. New technology. AI came up last. I knew AI had to come up in the paper. It came up. I wrote a list of vocab to do with new technology. I wrote an essay on it. It came up in the reading comprehension. It came up in the essays. So you have to build. So media, communications, anything to do with social media. The environment is a big topic. I won't say anything about it right now, but it'll probably come up this year. So essays on, so once you sort of build your vocab, then you're going to hear that vocab on a listening, you're going to see it on a reading, you're going to probably write about it. So anything, for example, current affairs, even a list of words to do with current affairs. Yeah. Vocab is the big thing.
And I suppose the last thing is, and when I reflect on my time in secondary school, one of my regrets is doing past French, ordinary French. I dropped to ordinary French to do 6 honours in the Leaving Cert. However, with the benefit of the adult head, and when I went to Spain, I thought, my God, the one thing you can bring out of secondary school, if there's one subject, because there's so much criticism of the education system,
That's true. And
is
it's
a language.
Yeah.
Is a language. And you can bring that. That's a skill for life. It's a tool
Yeah.
for life. And there's a joy in sitting with someone, conversing, being able to understand and talk. Where does your passion for languages come from? Because it is, we're talking about homework and study, but there is something amazing
this
in
passion,
communication.
Yeah. I think it's curiosity really for me. I was very lucky to go to an all-Irish primary school, Scolarcon in Monkstown in County Dublin, and then on to Coláiste Isagáin in Stillorgan. We had amazing teachers. So we were immersed from day one. We didn't know any different. From day one you were learning Irish. And my parents didn't speak Irish, but they wanted us to have an Irish education, which was quite unusual in the 70s. So I suppose I was speaking two languages without realizing it. So it didn't, it was, I learned French through Irish. So it wasn't, no, it's, you see, it's nothing to us. That's just the way we did it.
So it was through osmosis, and it was in part of your DNA.
And then so I suppose I asked my parents to send me to France when I was quite young. So, and then I moved to France when I was 17. So I was always curious. So a language is not just speaking, it's everything, it's the culture, it's the food, it's the music, it's the literature. I could keep talking about it. So once I realized that I wanted to learn more languages, and then I got an interest in minority languages, which are minor languages of a country that are not recognized. So I did some study and research on minority languages of France. And then, of course, so the interest, that's how the interest that's where it all started, in a little school in Monkstown, County Dublin.
Amazing. Siobhán Ghiolla, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Hopefully students will have got something out of this, and parents as well. I know they will, not hopefully, they absolutely will.
Lovely.
Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your passion and for sharing all that information and your passion and enthusiasm for the languages.
Thanks,
especially Irish, comes across. Gura Mágad agus
Gura Míle Mágad, Tá fáilte rót, Gura Míle.